Well, hello, folks. Hope you had a good Monday. I did. Uh, I was looking at something today by Eric Lee. He's a good guy to follow if you want to look at overshoot issues and things like that. And he's fairly eclectic in his interests, but mostly focused on overshoot and collapse and stuff like that. He talks a lot about RNK species and so on. I'm a little confused by boiling it down to something like that because human beings, we evolve through evolution by natural selection and all that kind of stuff. But we also have culture, and that throws a big something into the mix that complicates things much further. So presumably, we can evolve culturally, and the differences in our behavior can have a, an effect on the expression of genes, epigenetics. And so, generation after generation, we could become more passive or more aggressive or something like that. So, anyway, it's interesting, it's complex, and I don't know. People believe what they want to believe, as I always say. So I always question how much agency we have as individuals. But within culture, legal systems and culture, anthropology, cultural anthropology, I was reading this piece on the law of Cherokee, of the Cherokee Nation, Native Americans, were natives of that continent in the 16th and 17th century. Oh, or it was the 17th and 18th century, I think it was. And it's interesting to see their law, how they adjudicated disputes and so on. And the Shawnee also, because I'm reading that book, The Frontiersman now, and it's interesting to note the cultural clash between these settler colonialists from Europe and the natives, the native populations, various nations and groups of natives. There were so many different tribes, right? And they had different languages and different cultures and so on. But, a lot of similarities as well. They couldn't band together as a larger group to fight off the settlers, the colonialists. Settler colonialism is a thing. You can't avoid it if you look at history. I'm not making any moral or ethical judgments when I say that. It's just people do go settle other lands by force. They colonize. This happens. That's why England called the colonies, because we colonized North America. I mean, Europeans. So, and it continues today to a certain degree. Imperialism is a thing. All these things are things. So it's important to understand them. I think some groups, conquering groups like the Mongolians or even the Arab conquests or the Roman, I'm not so sure that they were, I mean, yes, they did settle and colonize, but they also, to a certain degree, were fairly hands-off in terms of the local people's culture. In other words, they didn't just go out and commit genocide, and like when the Romans went to the British Islands, what we call the British Islands now, Britannia, whatever they called it back then. They didn't go in and just slaughter all the people there and then replace them with Roman people from the, Italian peninsula, the Greco-Roman, whatever. Blood and soil stuff. They didn't do that. They just went and lived there, and if you paid your taxes and your tributes to the empire, you were fine. And I think if you're going to loosely term the United States of America today an empire, then it's similar. You pay tribute, in terms of minerals and resources, oil and gas, whatever, money, whether it's tariffs or taxes or whatever, to the empire. You have every country has its own tax system and sales tax and value added tax and all that. But anyway, the money gets kicked up to the country that's in charge, as it were. We sell weapons, we trade, and all that kind of stuff. In a way, there's tribute and taxes paid to the empire. But of course, cultures from other nations do choose to import American culture to whatever degree. And people do as well. Subcultures within a culture might decide they love rap music and they love tagging subways or something like that. Or they love Disneyland, or they love American movies, or whatever. But anyway, back then, the waves of settlers were coming quickly, right? And conquistadores, right? Conquistadors, conquering groups of people, spreading out across continents, right? And conquering people. In some ways, when you colonize, it's different. You use the local people to run the country, but you're above them. Anyway, you can study that. I'm not going to go into that anymore. But Eric put up a piece that's a very concise, short piece. U.S. energy consumption. The most ever fossil fuels burned in 1 year was burned in 2023. And how's that mitigating of climate change working for you? How's that mitigating of climate change? This comes from a report, which is very interesting, from the U.S. Energy Information Administration that will probably be fired by next month. We don't need them. Elon will probably tell them to quit. But they compile a lot of interesting science and data and information about energy consumption and use and resources and everything like that. We don't need them. Bureaucrats. Fuck them. But anyhow, so U.S. Energy Facts Explained, and the top of the piece, it says United States uses a mix of energy resources. Then they have various charts and graphs explaining what amount comes from oil and gas and coal and nuclear and renewable, and where those resources go to in terms of electricity. So you convert the energy. And of course, I'm also looking at, defining energy in terms of physics. Go to Encyclopedia Britannica and look it up, okay? Or look up the definition of energy, right? Doing work. And what that means, you need to understand that. If you're not talking to a Christian apologist, you can talk to somebody about these things and understand that these definitions matter, right? You can do etymology. You can what was the original Greek word and how was it used? I think the Greek one was, it was work. It was business also, something like that. Anyway, there were a lot of meanings. As words often have more than one exact meaning, right? Except certain nouns like apple, which you can have various kinds of apples, can't you? But an apple is an apple, as we know. So, so he has a little piece there, which is nice, and he talks about that and includes some graphs. One which is interesting that comes from Howard T. Odom, and I have books of his on my reading list. He's a must-read, in my opinion. In 1973, he said, "Seek out the condition now that will come anyway." It's an interesting quote. But there's a brief history of scientists' warnings, and there's a graph here. Limits to growth was 1973. World Meteorological Conference on Climate, that was 70 something, and then World Scientists Warning to Humanity, 1990. There's a whole bunch of them, all the way up to IPCC 2024. And David Suzuki in 2016 said 50 years, 37 climate conferences, a half dozen major international climate agreements, and various scientists' warnings have not reduced atmospheric carbon concentrations, nor the populations of pets, livestock, crops, and humans per capita consumption. Meanwhile, the pace of planetary destruction has not slowed. Overshoots a thing. You read Odom about that. A lot of people tend to want to talk about weather. Look, the spike is obvious. There are so many lines of evidence about what caused the recent spike in global heating. Okay, we're not looking at geological time or ice cores that go back millions, hundreds of millions of years. We're not looking at volcanic explosions or asteroids hitting the Earth or other causes, complex causes, plural, of climate change or global warming or global cooling or ice ages or anything like that. We can see the data clearly. Once we started burning fossil fuels, it just started rising. That's the hockey stick thing. Anyway, don't want to adjudicate that because people who don't want to understand climate science aren't going to make an effort to do it. If you're going to use fallacious arguments to prove the existence of God, then you're going to use them. There's no point in trying to be more accurate. Sometimes, if you're a Christian true believer, you would say, I believe that Jesus died on the cross, he was crucified, and he died, and then he rose again. He came back to life, and he hung out with his people, and so on and so forth. Most of Christianity probably comes from Paul and Peter and all the church fathers from the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church and all that, over centuries, thousands of years. And you believe it, it's a religion, you have dogma and so on. But you don't have real lines of evidence about Jesus rising from the dead. It's a story, and you believe it because you believe the sources that you're pointing to. And so that's it. You just have to say, I'm a believer. And if you're an atheist, it just means there's not enough evidence there to make you believe it. Maybe you require a little bit more evidence to believe in something. Well, there's tons of evidence to help you believe that anthropogenic climate change is real. And it's not hard to find. And I've been telling people this for decades, and it doesn't stick because people who don't want to know something aren't going to make an effort to learn about a subject or a domain of science or something like that. People who don't require evidence don't require extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims. They don't need it. I saw a ghost. I know. I experienced it. I saw it. You can't prove I didn't see it, right? So that's just the way people are in general. Some people care about, evidence and scientific methodologies and so on, and some people don't. So when we're looking at Neanderthals, why did they disappear? It's complex. We don't know. And scientists don't know exactly when the universe began or if there's multiverses or whatever. They just have lines of evidence that they can follow and interpret and come up with ideas and theories about it. And they admit they don't know because they don't know. So that's another thing. If you're Socrates, you're a genius because you don't know things. That's how smart you are. Anyway, so U.S. consumption by sources in 2023, we haven't slowed down. We're not going to slow down. So he goes into this a little bit, and he has a little, I don't know if it's made up or not, but Klaatu, would come in and save the world somehow. And he postulates that to save the world, you'd have to get rid of a lot of people, right? Because we're just going to use more and more materials the more energy we have. So if we have hydrogen or fusion or whatever, it's just going to require, we're just going to use more. That's Jevons paradox. And that's true. We'll just keep using more because we're not wising up. We don't say, well, we can only shoot so many buffalo on the plain because we need the buffalo, and we're not going to overconsume. We're going to care about the watershed and whatever. And to whatever degree humans, when they crossed over the Bering Strait, hunted various megafauna to extinction, we can guess, based on lines of evidence, but we don't know. There were horses, then there weren't horses, then Europeans brought back horses, whatever. But, at some point, some cultures did decide that they were going to try to live in such a way that nature around them could regenerate. So if you have grasslands, and if you fence it off and let the buffalo just eat in one area, they're going to run out of grass because the grass won't be able to grow back. More Odom stuff, right? So anyway, that's a nice little piece. It's very short. You can read it on Medium. The author's name, the narrator, is called Eric Lee. So he said at the bottom, if you have any answers, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I commented and I said, of interest, Klaatu might have to breed us after she imposes her population bottleneck. Now, population bottlenecks can happen for a lot of reasons, but there are ideas that it's just about certain men breeding with a lot of women as they go running around conquering territory, and then their genes become more prevalent. And you have the X and Y chromosome bottlenecks and so on. Other bottlenecks could be not really a bottleneck, but just near extinction events. Something happens, climate change, ice age, whatever it is, and there are fewer people. Everybody dies out. And there are lots of instances like this where we can point to times where we think maybe X number of people existed, 5,000 breeding couples or whatever it is. I don't have the notes in front of me. And then we bounced back, over time. So I said, of interest, the silver fox domestication experiment. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Russian scientists were breeding foxes, domesticating them. They would only take the most friendly foxes and breed them. And over time, they noticed that this breeding and the changes of behavior that were in part due to the relationship with the breeders, okay, the kind of a cultural relationship between the humans and the foxes and so on, changed their genes in many, many ways. So they started having different fur patterns, and faces became more dog-like, and the way they played was different. Vocalizations were different. Anyway, this experiment went on for a long, long time, many, many, many decades, and it's still going on today. So it's called the silver fox domestication experiment, which leads me to think that human beings can be domesticated, and we have been domesticated, and to some degree pacified, maybe not. I don't know what people were like 20,000 years ago or 30,000 years ago. But let's just extrapolate from, the Middle Ages or something. I don't know. How mean were we back then? How prone to violence were we, and so on. And then you have to look across cultures, because culture has an effect on this, how violent you are, and so on. So, and then a culture that's more pacifist might have more passive people, because in that particular population, you might be, people who are more passive, less aggressive, might breed more people, right? So it works both ways. You have evolution through natural selection, and you could have cultural evolution too that also affects genes and gene expression and traits that we eventually have as people. So I said, a domesticated fox can tell us much about the people who understand. The people who understand is the name of a tribe in the distant future, hundreds of thousands of years, many generations. So Klaatu might have to breed us to get us there. So breeding for the interconnected race. Okay, I'm using race as a kind of animal, right? As opposed to pigmentation in one's skin. So I made up a word. Buhubaquwa means, in your language, the people who understand. So, we name our tribe the people who understand. And I'm relating this to Eric Lee, so I mean people who listen to nature, who understand nature. Domesticated to a certain kind of nature, bred, designed, either by Klaatu or some other alien or god or people, godlike people, AIs, robots, AGI robots, breeding people. So anyway, or evolved to a particular type of nature, natural selection. You have to wonder, right? I mean, cultural and natural selection. So what brought us to the point where we have world wars and build nuclear bombs and sit around and watch men, women, and children getting murdered in a part of the world every day and think it's just normal? And a resurgence of Nazism in Europe and so on. Oh, well, it's weird. So on one hand, I can go to the big city here in Portugal and not get knifed or hassled or harassed or anything. And we live in peace. We go to the grocery store, we buy our stuff. Nobody yells at anybody. We're all flowing through the town in peace. And on the other hand, we still can very easily become violent and organized violence. What is it about politics and nationalism and all this stuff that makes us believe that we have to have war? We can't live without it. Defense, we need really complex weapons to keep us all in check. Because don't you know, every time you go to the shopping mall, you're having fistfights. No, we're living in peace. We're cooperating. We're fine. We go to the office. We're fine. In the States, of course, you have to carry a gun to work because it's so damn dangerous. And people do think it's kind of acceptable in some weird, sick way to go to a public place or a hospital and shoot people. Go figure. Anyway, we go to work and we live and we live in peace. We do our job and most of us don't shoot people, right? Whoa, that's crazy. So is this nature nurture kind of thing, partially culturally driven evolution and partially natural selection? How do you, deal with all the gray area there, the blurred lines and the timeline, all that kind of stuff? Why did Neanderthals disappear? We don't know. But they did for some reason. And we don't know. But anyway, we're the only ones left, bonobos and chimps. Why do they behave like they behave? They do have a certain way of behaving, bonobos and chimps. And we have our own thing, but it's more, our culture is much more complex. And of course, abstract reasoning and language and mathematics and all this stuff. It's amazing. But somehow we've survived. And even after the creation of nuclear weapons, we're still here. 70, 80 years later. Imagine that. So we do want to survive. And at the same time, we're doing things to destroy our habitat, which will destroy us. So we can choose to extinct ourselves by some bizarre, happenstance or whatever. So domesticated to a certain degree of nature, bred, designed, or evolved to a particular type of nature, natural selection, what pressures made modern techno-industrial humans over time, right? So when did modernity start? How do we define modernity? And so on. Much has been said about settling down and agriculture and all that kind of stuff. It's all interesting. Well, so why do chimps and bonobos behave like they do? Did great nature deem it so through its complex systems and physical laws? Great nature above Klaatu or the alien or the god or whatever? What created God, or I don't know. It's so, you know, once you get into theology, you're just spiraling through circular reasoning and begging the question until you can't beg anymore. Your knees are all chapped and broken. Behavior impacts gene expression across generations. So that's the cultural thing. We learn more about Neanderthals as new tools allow us to access new lines of evidence, but we still don't know why they disappeared. It's fascinating to have multiple lines of evidence for our extinction and, seemingly, to choose to ignore them for the exciting hyperstimuli of modern technological, industrial, capitalist, fossil fueled, blah, blah, blah. So he was talking about the energy slaves, which is a metaphor for fossil fuel, doing all our work for us, basically. If you live as a bushman in South Africa, you get your energy from the chemistry, from the intake of caloric, calories in food, and then you use your body to do all the work, to go from here to there, to pick things up, to hunt, to whatever. And so they're not using oil and gas and coal, but they do use, obviously, they burn firewood for cooking and all that kind of stuff. But at a certain scale, the trees and the bush will continue to grow back. So it renews itself, as opposed to a non-renewable resource like oil and gas. Of course, in geological time, maybe billions, hundreds of millions of years from now, all the e-waste is recycled by magma because of subduction, geological plates moving all the garbage into the magma. It's that's great, but we live here and now, and do you want your grandchildren to have a healthy world to live in? I don't know. To each his own, but I would think it'd be nice, but maybe human beings weren't meant to be around that long. Homo sapiens, our species. We're a flash in the pan, maybe. We're too clever for our own good. So a friend pointed out that in geological time, magma will recycle all e-waste. Subduction is a significant geological process involving plate tectonics. Well, and I will die someday. Unbelievable. Oh, and I forgot to mention that there is a black hole barreling toward the Milky Way as I type. How long can your average, and then I switch gears here, how long can your average bad Shawnee live in the wilderness alone once ostracized by the band? So in some cultures, if you were unruly and bad and didn't follow the rules, you were just cast out and you had to go it alone. And as we all should know by now, doing things on your own is very difficult. Most people will die in the wilderness alone. Very few people can survive to the point where they have the skills to live a solitary life in the wilderness. It's like going to Vietnam and how long does it take you to learn how to fight in the jungle? All the little tiny things you need to know to survive another firefight. And it's, if you survive, let's say, 3 months in the jungle fighting, your odds may go up to a certain degree that you're going to make it through your year deployment without getting killed. There's no guarantees, obviously. Getting killed in a war is highly random, but if you have the skills, your odds go up a bit. So I put a quote here. I make up some tribal chief is saying, One must cast him out before he breeds. It is a great shame to the tribe and the nation to let Running Rant, that's his name, our species, Running Rant, breed. If Running Rant can't understand, repeat from memory, and behave according to the lessons of his elders by the age of 13, he will cause all manner of disorders to his place and people. But we don't kill children. He may yet learn from nature, great nature, what is required to be a man. If he attempts to return to the band before 20 Kushko, Kushko means years in Shawnee. I looked it up. 20 Kushku. He will run the gauntlet 4 times and be banished. If he attempts to come back again before 20 Kushku, he may be killed. We might have to kill him because he doesn't listen. He can't learn. He just don't learn. And then I put a link to Law and Order of the Cherokee, a link to that. So anyway, that's all I'm going to share today. All of this stuff was posted at Facebook Globe Hackers page. So if you want to read the articles, you can go there and scroll through the wall, the timeline, and find the articles. I suggest, if people are interested in things like this, that Eric Lee is an entertaining writer in the space. He's prolific, and as he would say himself, you don't take anybody as gospel in this world. Everybody with a grain of salt. You do your own thinking, critical thinking. But he's a decent contributor in this space. And you can go to my book recommendations page, and there's tons of stuff on all kinds of angles on this. So I have an eco-socialist bookshelf, all kinds of stuff about political philosophy and general books, history. I'm just reading one, Joseph Roth, What I Saw. It's a journalist during Weimar Germany who was writing when the Nazis were coming to power. It's really interesting. And I'm reading Provoked, which is incredibly detailed examination of the United States of America's behavior around the world. And let's see, lots of good books there about nukes and all that stuff. And I have William R. Cotton Jr. Quotes, "Posterity doesn't vote and doesn't exert much influence in the marketplace, so the living go on stealing from their descendants." Life After Fossil Fuels, Alice J. Friedemann and Charles A.S. Hall, Energy Return on Investment. These are great books. Hyperobjects, Philosophy and Ecology After the End of the World. Ultra Society, 10,000 Years of War Made Humans the Greatest Cooperators on Earth. Overshoot, have to read that. Andreas Malm book, it's a very good one. There's all kinds of stuff here you can go and read away, and I would suggest you do it before you get too enamored by intellectual influencers on the internet. At the end of the day, we might run out of this, resource, because we run out of resources to power the resource. So read that Energy, U.S. Energy Facts Explained. Thank you for listening. Take good care. Buliam T. Out.